The severed arm should have ended the fight. Without it, blood pressure begins to collapse. Muscles lose oxygen. Consciousness narrows and then disappears. No amount of courage can command a body whose circulation is failing. And yet, Roman audiences told stories of gladiators who remained standing after wounds that should have stopped them. Men who advanced through blood, who held their ground after mutilation, who seemed almost detached from the destruction of their own bodies. For centuries, their endurance was explained as discipline. Training had taught them not to flinch. Shame was more frightening than death, and inside the arena, the greatest fighters had learned to hide their pain from thousands of watching eyes. But beneath an ancient gladiator cemetery at Ephesus, archaeologists found evidence suggesting that willpower was only part of the answer. Because the skeletons buried there did not belong to men who had entered the arena once and died. Their bones recorded entire sequences of violence. Fractures had healed, only to be broken again. Blades and blunt weapons had left different signatures. Some injuries showed careful treatment and long periods of recovery. These men had survived, and many had survived long enough to return to combat again and again. That created a problem. A gladiator who repeatedly survived serious injury was not merely brave. He had to be fed, conditioned, treated, repaired, and somehow returned to fighting shape. Survival was not simply an accident that occurred inside the arena, it was a process organized outside it, which meant the real question was no longer, how could a man continue fighting after losing an arm? It was, what had been done to his body before the weapon ever struck? The Roman gladiatorial school, the ludus, is often imagined as little more than a prison with swords, but in practice, it could function more like a tightly controlled system for producing human combatants. A successful gladiator represented years of training and considerable financial value. His owner paid for instructors, food, accommodation, equipment, and in some cases, specialist medical care. If every contest ended with the death of a fighter, that investment would disappear almost immediately. The objective was not simply to create men willing to die, it was to produce men capable of surviving violence dramatically. Almost every part of their lives could be controlled. Sleep, exercise, diet, recovery, even the interval between appearances. Some gladiators were enslaved, others were prisoners or condemned criminals. But free men also entered the arena voluntarily, signing contracts that surrendered control over their bodies in exchange for money, status, or the possibility of fame. Once inside the ludus, the gladiator's flesh became an investment, and Rome already possessed substances capable of changing how that flesh experienced pain. The most obvious candidate came from the opium poppy. Across the ancient Mediterranean, physicians knew preparations derived from poppies. They used them to relieve pain, to encourage sleep, and to treat a range of medical conditions. Opium could dull suffering, reduce awareness, make severe injury feel temporarily distant. Its medical use in the ancient world is well documented, but there is a problem. No direct evidence has shown that Roman gladiators were routinely given opium before entering the arena, and that distinction matters. The Romans possessed the drug. They understood that it could suppress pain, and physicians connected to gladiatorial schools treated traumatic injuries, but possibility is not proof. There is no surviving evidence of a systematic program in which fighters were regularly drugged before combat. And opium carried a dangerous contradiction. A dose powerful enough to make a gladiator indifferent to pain might also slow his reactions, disturb his balance, cloud his judgment, suppress his breathing, and leave him vulnerable to an opponent. The same substance that allowed a wounded fighter to ignore pain could make him too impaired to defend himself. A chemically numbed gladiator might survive the sensation of an injury, only to die because he reacted a fraction of a second too slowly. So those searching for an ancient rage drug have looked beyond the poppy toward a much darker plant. Henbane does not look like the source of a legend. It grows with dull leaves and pale, veined flowers, but almost every part of it is poisonous. The plant contains powerful compounds, including hyamine and scopolamine, that can produce confusion, agitation, altered perception, a racing heartbeat, delirium, and the loss of normal restraint. Roman pharmacology knew henbane. It also knew other plants capable of radically changing the body and mind. In extremely small quantities, some of these substances could be used medicinally. In larger quantities, they could produce terrifying mental states, or death, and this is where the theory becomes seductive. Imagine a gladiator given a carefully controlled preparation before entering the arena. His perception changes. Pain feels distant, fear weakens. Agitation rises. Even after being wounded, he continues attacking. To the crowd, he might appear almost superhuman, a man transformed into a weapon by rage. It is a compelling image, perhaps too compelling, because here, the evidence becomes dangerously thin. No surviving prescription instructs a gladiatorial physician to administer henbane before combat. No container recovered from a ludus has been conclusively identified as part of a standard pre-fight drug program. The plant existed. The Romans knew it. Its effects were powerful, and its use in the arena is possible. But the story often moves from the Romans possessed henbane to gladiators were routinely drugged with it, without discovering the evidence needed to cross that distance. And that missing evidence changes the entire investigation, because the real secret of the gladiator may have been more disturbing than any single potion. Perhaps Rome did not need one miraculous drug. Perhaps it had built an entire system around the human body, a system designed to manage injury, fear, nutrition, pain, and recovery. And the first hard chemical clue did not emerge from an ancient recipe. It came from human bone. At Ephesus, researchers analyzed the remains of 22 individuals identified as gladiators and compared them with other inhabitants of the Roman city. Carbon and nitrogen isotopes suggested that the fighters consumed a largely plant-based diet. In some respects, their diet was broadly similar to that of the local population, but one chemical signature stood out. The gladiators' bones contained an unusually high ratio of strontium to calcium, and researchers proposed an explanation that appeared to match descriptions preserved in ancient sources. Gladiators may have consumed a drink made from plant ash. Charred plant material could be mixed with water, or perhaps vinegar, and consumed after training or combat. The mixture may have provided additional minerals that were limited in their grain-heavy diet. In effect, it may have functioned as an ancient form of supplementation, supporting bones placed under repeated physical stress. And suddenly, the investigation changed direction. Because the strongest chemical evidence was not for a substance that created rage, it was for one that helped damaged men recover. The bones did not preserve the signature of a miracle combat drug. They preserved evidence of maintenance. A fighter could be wounded, treated, given time to heal, fed minerals, conditioned, and eventually sent back into the arena. His extraordinary endurance on the day of combat may have begun months earlier, when someone else decided what he would eat, what he would drink, how he would train, and when his body was ready to be used again. But the gladiators' diet contained another clue, and it may have changed not only how they recovered, but how they bled. Ancient writers referred to gladiators as hordeari, barley eaters. Their meals emphasized grains and legumes, not the enormous quantities of meat imagined in many modern depictions. The isotope evidence from Ephesus is consistent with a diet rich in plant foods, but it cannot reconstruct every meal, and it cannot prove that all gladiators throughout the Roman Empire followed exactly the same diet. Still, the pattern is striking. At first, barley appears to be the food of poverty, cheap fuel for men whose owners wanted to feed them at the lowest possible cost. But some researchers have proposed another possibility. A high carbohydrate diet may also have encouraged the development of a thicker layer of subcutaneous fat. And for an arena fighter, that layer may have served an unexpected purpose. A shallow blade passing through fatty tissue could create a large and highly visible wound without immediately severing deeper muscles or major blood vessels. Blood would spread across the skin. The crowd would see damage. The danger would appear real, because it was real. But the fighter might remain mobile. His body had not been made invulnerable. It may have been shaped to bleed theatrically. This interpretation remains debated. The evidence establishes a grain and legume-heavy diet more securely than it establishes the exact purpose, or effect, of the resulting body composition. But even as a possibility, it reveals the cold logic behind the spectacle. Roman organizers did not necessarily want the fastest possible death. A dead gladiator could no longer perform. What the arena needed was visible danger, prolonged uncertainty, blood, fear, and fighters capable of surviving long enough to be used again. The same logic extended beyond food. It reached into medicine itself. The physician Galen spent part of his early career treating gladiators at Pergamon. Their injuries gave him an unusual view into living human anatomy. He gained experience treating fractures, open wounds, trauma, and recovery. He also paid close attention to diet and hygiene. His presence reveals something important. Gladiatorial medicine was not always improvised after a contest. Skilled practitioners could be connected directly to the institutions that owned and trained the fighters, and that changes how the arena must be imagined. Behind every dramatic wound stood an entire support system whose task was to prevent that wound from destroying an expensive body. Trainers built technique, cooks controlled fuel, physicians closed flesh and stabilized fractures. Mineral drinks may have supported recovery. Analgesic plants could have reduced suffering after injury, and perhaps more speculatively, altered pain before combat. But medicine was only one part of the system. The mind was trained as carefully as the body. Gladiators repeated the same movements until defense became automatic. They learned to maintain posture while exhausted. They practiced under pressure. They were exposed to violence again and again, and they understood that visible fear could destroy their reputation before an opponent destroyed their body. Over time, training itself may have changed how they experience pain. During extreme danger, attention narrows. Adrenaline can temporarily suppress sensation. A fighter focused entirely on an immediate threat may fail to recognize the full extent of an injury until the danger has passed. This natural chemistry may explain more than any secret potion, but there was one thing it could never do. It could not defeat catastrophic blood loss. Return to the severed arm. Could a gladiator continue fighting after losing it? For a brief period, possibly. A person whose arm had been completely severed might remain conscious for a short time, especially if the injury did not immediately destroy a major artery, or if pressure somehow reduced the bleeding. Adrenaline could delay the full experience of pain. Shock might alter awareness. Training might allow a few final movements to continue almost automatically, and a pain-dulling substance could make the injury feel more distant. But none of those things could replace lost blood. Opium could not restore circulation. Henbane could not return oxygen to the brain. No ancient drug could prevent the body from entering irreversible shock. A chemical might conceal the warning. It could not remove the injury. The legendary image of an armless gladiator fighting indefinitely belongs more to the machinery of myth than to established Roman evidence. And that may be the darkest discovery of all, because the rage drug story gives the gladiator a secret power. It transforms him into a willing berserker, a man capable of transcending ordinary human limits. But the archaeological evidence points in the opposite direction. The gladiator remained painfully human, and that humanity was carefully exploited. Could a gladiator continue fighting after losing it? For a brief period, possibly. A person whose arm had been completely severed might remain conscious for a short time, especially if the injury did not immediately destroy a major artery, or if pressure somehow reduced the bleeding. Adrenaline could delay the full experience of pain. Shock might alter awareness. Training might allow a few final movements to continue almost automatically, and a pain-dulling substance could make the injury feel more distant. But none of those things could replace lost blood. Opium could not restore circulation. Henbane could not return oxygen to the brain. No ancient drug could prevent the body from entering irreversible shock. A chemical might conceal the warning. It could not remove the injury. The legendary image of an armless gladiator fighting indefinitely belongs more to the machinery of myth than to established Roman evidence, and that may be the darkest discovery of all. Because the rage drug story gives the gladiator a secret power, it transforms him into a willing berserker, a man capable of transcending ordinary human limits. But the archaeological evidence points in the opposite direction. The gladiator remained painfully human, and that humanity was carefully exploited. His diet was controlled because his flesh had economic value. His fractures were repaired because replacing him was expensive. His pain could be treated because he was expected to fight again. Even a substance that reduced his suffering could return him more quickly to the conditions that had caused it. The system did not eliminate pain. It converted pain into a renewable resource. At Ephesus, the bones reveal bodies that had been injured, healed, and injured again. Their chemistry records food and supplementation. Their wounds record the weapons they faced. Their survival records the skill of those who maintain them. Together, those clues suggest that the gladiator's endurance was not created by one drug. It emerged from an integrated system of nutrition, conditioning, medicine, discipline, recovery, and ownership. Opium may have dulled some wounds. Henbane may have appeared in certain medical preparations, but neither can currently be identified as the universal chemical secret of the Roman arena.